You probably saw last week, Chairman Atkins of the SEC gave an interview about tokenization. He called it a great innovation. And we agree with that. We think tokenization is perhaps the biggest innovation to come into capital markets in the past decade.
Robinhood just reported fantastic earnings results. A couple months ago, they had an event in France where they talked about the future of their product roadmap and the crypto business, where it's going. And something that Vlad has been consistently talking about is tokenization. In fact, he called it the most innovative technology over the past decade. But the fact of the matter is that many people don't understand the implications of tokenization, how it's going to work, and what it means for them and the industries that tokenization could potentially transform. A lot of people look at NFTs and they might think, oh, this is just NFTs by association. And they don't really look past that to look at the underlying technology and what that's going to do. I had a great conversation with Roy and with Steve in the FinTech Friday after hours show. And a lot of that conversation was focused around tokenization. And so in this video, I'm going to be playing a clip from my interview with Vlad, Tenev, CEO of Robinhood, talking about tokenization, so you can hear directly from Vlad as he explains what it is, and then also playing clips from that discussion, which is generally reserved for members only, so that you can get a better idea of what tokenization is and how impactful it could potentially be to the global economy if done right. And it seems to be a massive bet that Robinhood is taking on. Understanding this bet, I think, is going to be the key to understanding where Robinhood goes from here and the impact that they're going to have from a product delivery point of view. Enjoy. The Washington Post op-ed, I read that. I found that really interesting. And you mentioned it on the earnings call yesterday as well. This tokenization aspect for privately owned companies, essentially democratizing this accredited investor system out there. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. I do believe that that's something that you guys are taking seriously, especially with the comments made yesterday on the earnings call. Like, I do agree that a lot of the money is now concentrated, but I think that's also by design, because a lot of these private companies wouldn't necessarily want the headache of being publicly traded when they can just raise the money from, one fund or two funds. Why would early stage companies want to go that route of tokenizing in the first place?
I think the value prop is less so the tokenization itself, but more so the easy access to global capital. Right now, if you are an early stage entrepreneur that's creating a business, maybe you've got a small team of 5 to 10 people, you have to do two very, very difficult things simultaneously at a very sensitive and high stakes time for your company. You have to figure out how to make a product that works, that customers will use, while also raising capital. And these are both sort of like full-time jobs. When I was raising our seed round for Robinhood back in 2013, I had to raise $3 million. And nobody wanted to give us money because we didn't have regulatory approval. So there was a catch-22 situation where we needed the money to have the regulatory approval, but venture capitalists were reluctant to give us the money because there was this overhang of us needing this approval that, there was uncertainty about whether we would get it. So I had to talk to over 75 people to raise the initial $3 million. And back then, you could invest in Robinhood at a 10 million valuation cap on AngelList. So we took all comers, I would pitch, individual angel investors from the Midwest in the same way that we would pitch Andreessen Horowitz and Google Ventures, some of the largest venture capital firms. And we basically gave these folks their full allocations, and they ended up doing very, very well. But that took many, many months of my time at the time where we really would have been better served focusing on building product. So imagine there was a click of a button and I could deploy and raise capital for my early stage venture from a global market, a global liquid market, and that money would be delivered to me, to my business, instantaneously. I mean, that's a very valuable product for an early stage entrepreneur. I would certainly press that button, and I would have pressed that button. I would have taken advantage of that service. And I think if that existed, we would have more innovation in this country. Like, more people would be starting companies because the friction is just so high. No matter how much you read about companies being funded, I mean, it's all out there. you don't hear about all the companies that are banging their heads against the wall trying to raise a seed round and doing it at extreme cost. So I think a lot of people talk about SpaceX and OpenAI and these later stage companies. And I
Right.
agree. I think those are compelling opportunities. But downstream, I think there's also a primary opportunity of providing funding to early stage ventures and making that process a little bit easier. And I also believe there's risks, of course. Early stage venture where the opportunity is greatest, the risk is also greatest. But we're in a world where you're basically free to invest in any meme coin you want,
Right.
right? So I think both private opportunities being restricted, but meme coins being free to invest in, uh, it those things cannot stand simultaneously. And I think people should be free to do with their own money what they want. So I'm obviously a supporter of meme coins, but I think private companies should be much more accessible to everyday retail investors.
Yeah, I understand that stance of if I'm a day one startup and I want to raise money, I don't want to divert my attention to go, raise a series A round as well as building the product full time. But I mean, you have this essentially existing right now in a much, much smaller scale in the crypto ecosystem, right? The companies do an ICO, for example, and that's how they get the liquidity to be able to fund their development.
Yep.
And so, in a sense, they're essentially already doing it. I guess the only piece that's missing would be
They can't
some,
do it in the US. Yeah, that's a big
right,
one. All these ICOs have to be structured as non-US
right.
offerings where you actually have to like base it overseas and take money from foreign investors.
And so the idea here would be so there's two pieces here. The first piece is why does this need to really be on the blockchain if regulators are open to changing this structure? Then what's the benefit of the blockchain here?
Yeah,
And
that's
then
a great
the
question.
second piece is the regulatory piece, right?
Yeah, I think the benefit of being on an existing crypto chain is you get the benefits of all of the people that have access to those wallets globally already. Not to say that it can't be done on either private blockchains or private ATSs. But I think with private ATSs, you have the chicken and the egg problem. You can get access to the companies, but can you get access to the investors that would be buying those companies? Can you create a liquid two-sided market? And you have to build that from scratch. And that requires a lot of intense technology. You have to build a good matching engine. You have to manage the order books. You have to manage the customer accounts. And with crypto technology, you already have an install base of hundreds of millions. They already have crypto wallets. You don't have to build any of the technology because it's all done for you. You pretty much would only have to focus on getting the supply because the other side of the market is already there. And you get fractionalization and round the clock trading for free, which are actually non-trivial to build well in a legacy environment. The major exchanges still don't operate 24/7. That's like a 3-year roadmap for the exchanges. I think they're going to get there, but it's not going to be quick.
So how do you see it functionally playing out like a marketplace where I were to, let's say, go into a two-way marketplace and I have a business and I can pitch it there. And then on the other side of that marketplace are people who can, with one click of a button, invest in my business?
Yeah, and I think that over time, it'll be integrated into the non-custodial wallets.
Hmm.
I think you'll see these on public blockchains where you can transact on exchanges, not only centralized exchanges, but also decentralized. And mechanically, it'll work very similar to other crypto assets, but the underlying asset will represent ownership in a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think with regards to tokenization, like there's obviously a very big implication there. If it's done right, this is something where like regulators and lawmakers would all get involved to some degree or another. Right now, it seems fairly localized to Robinhood because they're the main ones who are talking about it. But I think as more and more, like as they go deeper into this rabbit hole, then I think it's going to become more of a topic in the zeitgeist.
I think tokenization is bullshit, my opinion. I'm not following it much. I'm not putting much stock in it. I just think it's a ridiculous idea. But if for some reason it makes private markets more accessible, then I think that could be interesting. But the idea that we're going to tokenize real estate is just crazy to me.
Why is that crazy?
It just is.
You already have REITs, which is basically tokenized real estate in the first place.
Yeah, well, it's fractionalized versus tokenized.
Well,
What's the difference between fractionalized and tokenized? Like conceptually, it's the same thing, no?
Fractionalized, you own a chunk of but it's direct ownership. But to actually sell that, to buy that, to add more, to keep track of any movements that are happening there, it's very inefficient versus tokenized. Tokenized, it's moving on the blockchain, so you have instant programmable. You can even have smart contracts built right in there that if this event happens, so this building sells, then you give the proceeds of that to this person delivered at this wallet through this means.
what would be the value add for somebody for a tokenization of a house? What's the value add there?
It could make the process of actually buying or selling a little bit quicker.
Not only that, but like if I want to split a piece of land with 5 of my friends or a property, a commercial property that I think is going to appreciate, then all of a sudden I have the ability to do that versus all the hoops that you have to jump through normally. It wouldn't even be applicable to you because they don't let you buy a fraction of an asset like that because of liquidity. Same with private markets, right? Like if I go on Hive or any of these private markets, it's like batches of like 50K or 250K for an allocation. Like nobody wants to do the hassle of the paperwork for me to buy $500 worth of XAI. If it's tokenized, then all of a sudden you subsegment out that liquidity, thereby making it so much more accessible to people with small amounts of money.
Which I think you'd agree with, Steve, is it makes it easier to trade real world assets beyond.
You're gonna have to explain that to me because I don't understand how that's true. I have a baseball card. How is that going to be tokenized if I'm holding the baseball card?
Well, like think of it this way. If you have the baseball card, how I imagine it working is Robinhood buys the baseball card. They sell shares of the baseball
Gotcha.
card.
So they would have to take possession of whatever the asset is, and then they create a token that can be divided however many times.
That's how I'm imagining it.
Whatever clearinghouse, but
I'm just want to make sure because if you're talking about tokenizing physical assets, that would mean that you would need an Iron Mountain, so to speak, storage facility to hold all the physical assets. Like you can't have me holding a baseball card and then a token out there in the wild, but I still have a baseball card.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily need like a massive repository of these things, but there will pop up companies that will serve as holding like clearinghouses essentially for all of these things, right? Like maybe Robinhood initially does tokenization and they're the ones buying all the underlying assets and issuing shares. And on the actual like deed of the property, it shows Robinhood. But as more companies start to do it, then they themselves start accumulating other assets. So it's like, well, I can go and buy SpaceX shares on Robinhood and Robinhood owns the actual shares, or I can go buy SpaceX shares on SoFi, or I can go buy SpaceX shares on whoever, and they all have allocations. I could see it working the same way for real world assets as well. All of these brokers essentially offer their own tokenized pieces.
Let's just say they made 100 tokens of one asset. If you end up buying all 100 tokens, you would have access to the right to exchange those for the actual asset if you wanted to claim it?
Yeah, I mean, well, no, not necessarily. Like that asset will appreciate in value. Thereby, your tokens will also appreciate in value. Like if you buy prime real estate in New York City, you alone as an individual cannot afford that. But if Robinhood buys it and then splits it into 1,000 pieces, then you as an individual can own one of those 1,000 pieces. As that property in New York City appreciates, your little chunk appreciates with it. In this sense, you're creating real markets out of thin air, essentially. Because like if I have that real estate property by Central Park, what are the methods for me to check the real-time value of that property on any given point in time? I probably don't have them. I probably have like monthly reports. I probably have like what did nearby properties sell for.
I think it's just nearby comps.
Sure, nearby comps, but that's not necessarily accurate. But if it's tokenized, then you're creating a real market in real time because I can look at the value of the property up and down based on the demand that's moving of the tokens.
Everything can be tokenized, but one of those areas that I thought of was as it relates to royalties for music, movies, video games as well. Let's say that there's a startup movie studio that's starting up. Maybe it has a very famous director and a couple of very famous people, but it's brand new. Now they could raise finances in the traditional way, or instead they can say, you know what, we have this amazing movie idea. Here's a little preview. We're issuing this many tokens, which are going to give you the legal right for the proceeds of the movie after all the expenses is in perpetuity. So they end up tokenizing the entire movie. It's a weird fundraising
Oh,
thing.
that's
You can do
actually
that.
interesting.
You can do that for music. You can do that for video games. You know, if a company was like, yeah, we want to create a video game, we're just not sure this is going to be demand, they could basically issue those tokens and say, you get 50% of the rights or whatever, depending on how much you have. And of course, there can also be built into these things like voting rights. So one of those oddities of American football, which you may not be aware of, Tevis, but it's Green Bay Packers actually have shares, ownership shares. And technically the people are owners kind of, but not really. But I mean, it could function the same way where if somebody is like, you know what, I want to sell my entire NFL franchise or team, like I don't think that the NFL would allow this, but potentially they could say, okay, we're going to actually tokenize it. And based on that, you have certain voting rights and shares. When you have above this level of access, you're on the board and you help control and make decisions. Like you could do that.
Let me take it one step further. And this is a little bit into the wild territory. Why don't you tokenize people's careers? If somebody wanted to buy shares in Tevis's career or Amit's or Tanner's, you could say, okay, well, I'm an up and coming content creator as an example. By holding these shares, you'll get a percentage of my revenue as a dividend for each holder.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you have a financial incentive to see me or Roy or Steve or whomever succeed because you get paid when they get paid. And if they blow up, then you also get your dividends increase. Like once you extrapolate out, it's very exciting to see what the possibilities are, right?
Now we got to get Robinhood up in Canada so Tevis can get on the prediction market. So
we need to create our own prediction markets. Will Roy hit 10K subs this year? Yes, no.
That exists already on Kalshi and also Poly Market. And I expect that that's probably something that might eventually come to Robinhood.